Now, the U.S. Secretary of Defense says the purpose of Washington's plan to deploy new low-yield nuclear weapons is to force Russia to respect agreements on limiting nukes. James Mattis says Moscow is violating the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, adding that Washington wants to have a bargaining chip to pressure Russia into compliance. He made the statements at a hearing in the U.S. Congress. Over the past several months, Washington has accused Russia of developing a new cruise missile that violates the 1988 treaty. Moscow has rejected the allegations. Last week, the Pentagon released an updated nuclear strategy review. The document lays out plans to revamp the diversity of the U.S. nuclear arsenal to counter what Washington calls threats from North Korea, Iran, China, and particularly Russia. Joining us via Skype from Ontario is Jason Unruhe. He's a political commentator. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Unruhe. Before I get into whether these quote-unquote new low-yield nuclear weapons can actually be used as a bargaining chip with Russia, there are many critics of the U.S.'s own nuclear policy that say that this low-yield nuclear weapon is only going to lower the threshold for nuclear war for the U.S. And let's not forget, these weapons, despite the terminology, can cause just as much damage as the bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Oh, absolutely. I think that much of the stated reason for these new nuclear weapons is completely false. I think that very much, if you look at what it is that is under development in the United States in terms of nuclear weapons, it is a much more mobile weapon. As it is right now, the United States has about 150 nuclear warheads stationed throughout Europe. The problem is that the world has changed since many of those weapons were introduced during the Cold War or immediately post-Cold War. The fact is, the situation has changed, and there are many theaters in which Russia is engaged which are very different from those during the Cold War. For example, in the Middle East, helping defend the Syrian government from U.S.-backed terrorists in the country, a shifting of nuclear weapons to be aboard ships and planes, things that are much more mobile, gives much more flexibility to the targeting capabilities of these weapons. Now, the U.S. may say that this is in response to an alleged breach by Russia, but this is the kind of accusation that we've heard from the United States many times over. We've heard this about supposed chemical weapons in Syria. We heard this about chemical weapons inside of Libya, and many of these have turned out to be completely false. So I think this whole idea that it's trying to punish Russia for some kind of violation, which I'd be very interested to see some evidence of that, is really more of a justification for a reorientation of the nuclear weapons that already exist in the country.
Right, it is a case of who you want to believe, because it's Russia who's turned around and accused the U.S. also of being in violation of its treaty through its overtures in Europe. However, now looking at Mattis' strategy of using these weapons as a bargaining tool with Russia, is Russia going to be coerced? Is this carrot and stick policy that the U.S. is so famous for going to work?
I sincerely doubt it. Russia has demonstrated in the past that it is certainly willing to stand up to the United States. The United States warned Russia that if they were to send forces into Syria, that they would begin targeting them or taking some kind of action, specifically military action against them. Yet we haven't seen that thus far. I don't see Russia as being intimidated by what it is that the U.S. is doing, because I think that the real risk of the mutually assured destruction principle still remains. Nobody really wants to use nuclear weapons, but they will use it if they have no choice. Even threatening to use them against a power like Russia is of sending them back. So I really believe that this is not intended to try to intimidate the Russians at all, but rather a justification to spend more money on more flexible, in terms of deployment, nuclear weapons.
Okay, let's leave it there for now. That's Jason Unruhe, political commentator, joining us via Skype from Ontario. Mr. Unruhe, as always, thank you very much indeed for your comments here on Press TV.